Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 8.52. Okay, we have the invasion of Yugoslavia, and since it happened early, because historically it happened in 41, summer 41, and this is sort of when I normally invade, but Germany has, I believe, declared war on them, or maybe or Italy, but either way, one of them started the war, and they're attacking with garrison divisions. Well, this may go fairly well for the Yugoslavs. Greece was still being allied with Yugoslavia, so they're doing all right. We've yet to get to a place where, or get units up here where we can help them out. We'll see if we're going to do that or not. I'm not sure. Bank for International Settlements. Yes, we will give them the most. You know, if they're going to be attacking with garrison divisions and such, we might have some chance, but I don't want to make the same mistake. Well, it was militarily a mistake. Politically, it may have been the best thing to do, of weakening the North Africa campaign to try to fight in here. Sending a division or two is not going to change the outcome of whether it's the Greek campaign or the Yugoslav campaign, or whatever you want to look at it. And because even if I were to move all of these units in here, I'm not going to defeat Germany. Could we hold out? Like, we're holding out just fine here. I may even reduce the strength by a division or two. I'm a little worried about if Finland comes in. I'm going to move these guys back once they take the port. But, this may not be so bad if they are not coming in until they're at war with the Soviet Union, and we can pincer them and take out the North. But as long as this stays here, now they're using 2 divisions here, holding a few more of mine, which isn't good economy of force, of course, but it is denying them the strategic effect, which I don't know how much it's hurting them. Okay, Indian Army recruitment has advanced. Great. What's the year date? Okay, 39, so we want to continue that. And that should give me another, yep. Recruit Indian units. Yep, hopefully it's a good division. Yeah, it's that. Garrison and some anti-aircraft. Still should have some sort of use. We'll send it over here anyways. Don't want to weaken India too much, but that. So, but what we also need to research some more stuff. even more. Okay. Let's go ahead and rest again. But I think we can affect the outcome on our own of the North African campaign against Italy. And maybe before Germany gets involved. Yeah, we're taking a lot of losses down here. These are moving up along. Close air support. Yeah, we know we're gonna not do too well here. Small war warship radar advance. That's very good, because that helps in our submarine warfare. Those are about as far forward as we can push them. We'll need to do this. So yeah, a lot of sub detection improvements. Okay, but now yeah. Take the attack. No, that isn't going to be good because of the river primarily, I think. Okay, well. They're going there. So we'll go here with them. And here with them. So now we're cloning infantry back up into there. We'll keep them there. Money for fuel. Okay, well if they need some money, they can have it. Don't know if they'll keep them alive longer, but hey. Okay, capital ship anti-aircraft. Air control has been improved. That's excellent. It's grayed out. Well, let's improve battleship engines. I don't know when we're going to really start building more capital ships. Gun ability 4 engine airplanes. We don't need any jets. So we can, of course, start improving. Some of those, and no, we're too far away. Okay, the Hornet is launched. Good. Okay, Germany plans strategic bombing of England. Our intelligence operatives are reporting Germany is planning on strategic. We can only hope she holds out. Of course, we hope so. Okay, first Polish Corps. Like the image, it's very nicely done. After the defeat of Poland in 1939, many Polish soldiers and civilians made their way to the Atlantic ports, where around 24,000 were evacuated to Britain. The Polish army was located in Scotland from the summer of 1940 and began immediate rebuilding. The troops were to remain in Scotland until the end of the war. Organized into the Polish Corps later, the first Polish Corps forming the formation of the second Corps in the Middle East. Polish troops were involved in the defense of the Fife region of eastern Scotland from a potential German invasion in Norway. The Corps became the basis on which the 1st Armored Division, the 1st Independent Parachute Brigade, the 4th Infantry Division, and the 16th Independent Armored Brigade were formed. Okay, that's all true. Didn't quite know the numbers of 24,000, but a lot of Poles, military, civilians, made it to the United Kingdom. A lot, maybe more. I think more. But a lot of Poles were interred. That's too nice of a word. Were put into concentration camps by the Soviets. Large numbers. Basically all the Polish soldiers, I think, that they rounded up in their occupation/invasion of Poland, as well as the Polish Officer Corps. Approximately half of the Polish Officer Corps rounded up by Germany. It was sort of asked by the Soviet Union, I guess, or what to do with these people, was split up. Half went to the Soviet Union. Germany kept the other half of the Officer Corps. Germany, of course, put them in concentration camps, prisoner of war camps, work camps, whatever you want to call them. Not fun conditions. Okay, we're not excusing any of that. What the Soviets did was they took them out to the Katyn forest, their officers, and shot them all. The Germans found this. It was pointed out to them when they invaded the eastern part of Poland as their invasion of the Soviet Union, and they made a highly publicized splash about this. That the Soviets, of course, denied. The Allies sort of denied that it was real, but it was very real. These were the leadership elements of Poland, and Stalin wanted to erase Polish national identity from the map. And so your officer corps are your intellectuals, and we're generally very conservative, at least it's my understanding of the Polish officer corps, meaning they weren't going to be good little helots in the Soviet worldview, you know, so they just all got shot. Well, that was, of course, a mistake, and I do believe at the time most of the Poles believed the German story was true. Like I said, very large numbers of Polish soldiers, as well as I believe some civilians, but I know very large numbers of soldiers, were taken prisoner by the Soviet Union and used as, you know, in the Gulag forced labor system. I don't think that they were anything like some of the stuff in Germany where they were intentionally working them to death. I don't know if they were within, who knows, within the Soviet state, whether there was ever the thought of, oh, they will be, you know, let out again someday to, you know, be future Soviet citizens, or whether they would just be forever in the Gulag system. But because part of what Stalin was doing was controlling the people, of course, part of it was different public works projects, if you will, you know, infrastructure projects and such, and using the labor for this. And trained soldiers are maybe not as big as a likely area of revolt as the officer corps, but was still a potential, so they were going to control it. Once the Soviet Union invaded, or was invaded by the Germans, the Soviets, of course, found, hey, we're your really good buddies, actually. We were just sort of keeping you safe from the Germans while there, and now we want you to come and fight for us in the great cause against Germany. Basically, they said no and revolted. And I don't have all the details of that right now in mind, but just how that happened. But they just said "F you" to the Soviets, and the Soviet and the Polish government in exile in Britain didn't know of the at the time, till the Germans found it, of the massacre of the officers, but they knew of the mass deportation east to wherever. I don't know whether it was way out here or just here or wherever it was, of large number of Polish soldiers. So combination of diplomatic efforts through Britain and the Polish government in exile, combination of just about every last one of these soldiers were not convinced to be part of the great Soviet Republic. So this force basically marched, I do believe mostly unequipped with any weapons, marched down into the Middle East through Iran. I don't know if Iran had been occupied at that time, but they marched down in through here. I mean, in a long sort of Homeric March of the 10,000 of Xenophon type march into the Middle East, and I believe that that's the Second Corps that they're talking about. There is what was formed, because I do know that there was about a core strength of Poles were formed, maybe a weakish core, but it was more than a division's worth of manpower that made it through up. And of course there were a lot of deaths in the Gulag system. Even this march had a significant attrition factor on it, and it was, to my understanding, mostly a literally physical march, not put on trains or whatever. If somebody has more information on the story, gladly post it. So that's that story. So where, to my knowledge, there was a mass evacuation of young military-age men from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, again east into the Gulag system, and they stayed there. The Soviets did not trust them to use them as combat troops, and saw that how much collaboration there was in the Baltic states with the Germans. So there was no thought of trying to form, if you will, Soviet foreign legions or whatever of these people, but they had fought. And it was initially that the Soviets wanted to form them as a core of pro-Soviet people. So, of course, we want that. Okay, the 31st Indian Armored Division. The 31st Indian Armored Division has now formed in Hyderabad, India. Historically, the 31st Indian Armored Division was an armored formation of the Indian Army during World War II, formed in 1940 as the 1st Indian Army Division. It consisted of units of the British Army and the British Indian Army. When it was raised, it consisted of 2 armored brigades, 1st and 2nd Indian, 1 motor brigade, 3rd Indian Motor Brigade. In mid-42, by which time the support group had been disbanded, the 251st Brigade was detached, and the rest of the division was shipped to join the British 10th Army and served in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The division never saw combat, although the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade was detached to Egypt and saw heavy action in the Western Desert Campaign during 1941 and 2, and again in 44 and 45 when reformed as the 43rd Indian Infantry Brigade, Lorried. It was sent to the Italian campaign as an independent brigade, consisted of the rest of the division. The closest the rest of the division came to combat was in April 44 when it was rushed to Egypt to crush mutiny among Greek 1st Infantry Brigade. Don't know about that. Didn't know the Greeks revolted. The tank regiment received M4 Shermans in November 43, although in preparation for the transfer to Italy, which never came about, and only drove them in Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. Okay, yeah, that's definitely Western Desert type tanks there that are pictured, with the Indian troops in front of them. Excellent. Broadcasting still with the German thing. Let's have it program. Okay, the Chaplain, the Great Dictator. Yeah, I noticed, I think it was after TRE had a Great Dictator event, but BICE has also made an event. October 15th, Charlie Chaplin releases his brilliant and controversial wartime satire of the Great Dictator. It's very good. So, okay. Well. Hyderabad's down here, isn't it? Oh, there we are. Now, my bet is... Now, see, they're showing him here with the M3. Please. My bet, the main reason the armored brigade was not used in combat was, maybe it was a leadership training issue, if you will. Could be. Don't know what the overall skill level of the Indian troops at doing that was. But I do know that sort of the armor that was in India at the time used in the stuff was sort of interwar armor, if you will, that really was bad stuff, and at least compared to, sort of like the Italian type riveted armored tanks. You saw some of that in, I'm not just talking about the Crusader type cruisers. I'm talking some of the earlier stuff. I don't remember the exact marks or whatever right offhand, but you wouldn't want to put it up against Rommel's Afrika Korps. So, but it would work for crushing the Iraq revolt and overawing any sort of rebel revolting type Arab elements in this part of the world. So the tank is as good as a tank ever was, whether in 1930 or 1940 or 1950, that same tank performs just as well. It's competition. So if you're looking for an armored force, say, to fight against the Japanese, now you don't really need a armored force. Few tanks to control and patrol some of the roads if you're invading a place like Burma, because it's obviously very mountainous and jungly, and you're not going to do massive armored sweeps through it, but you can have some support tanks, which they did send. I know some, well, they may also send some Shermans too, maybe, but I know they sent some of the Grants to use some of the elements of the Burma campaign. So, but if you were going to be fighting even in a more open plain situation, the Japanese armor, hey, that's not very good. You can use somewhat out-of-date armor against it there. And of course, if you are occupying Iran or fighting anybody else without armor, the tank is still just as good as it ever was. And of course, you can give tanks like those to, say, motorized infantry divisions or something, as to going, hey, here's some tanks better than no tanks kind of thing. But if you see real other enemy tanks, run away fast kind of situation, and best to run away towards your anti-tank guns so you lure the enemy tanks on, into the killing zone of your anti-tank guns, but they're not suitable for armored thrusts. And that's one thing. Actually, I'm right now reading Winston Churchill's History of World War II. I'm on the book Alone, which is this time period, Britain Alone, so I thought it was good. And he'd been talking about, his experiences dealing with the French high command at this time, and I've recently reread Bevan Alexander's Inside the Nazi War Machine, which is basically has really nothing to do with Nazis. It's just a cool title, I guess. It covers the setting up and how the strategically how the 1940 campaign played out, and he talks very much about Manstein's overall plan, and very much about Guderian's, massing your tanks for the most effective thrust, and he's absolutely right about that. But how do I put this? Obviously, go to war with the army that you have, not necessarily the army you want or the army that's best suited for that war. France's army was sort of like the supreme. I'm not necessarily saying quality of leadership or quality of training, because I think that sort of fell apart within the French army. Maybe, I don't know that well. Panzermaus or PZ Maus, or forget exactly, who has contributed a few events to TRE, who's French, dealing with the French, contribute a little bit more than has made it in, just partially because of my laziness. But might dispute, and it will probably knows better, but might dispute some of this. But you know, because I look at sort of the communication structure and the training levels of the French army, dealing with that, and it was pitifully bad. But it was equipped to be the supreme army on the planet to fight World War One. So if you wanted to fight World War One, get the French army, at least in organization and tactics and all of that. Now, being good at fighting World War One doesn't mean you're going to be good at fighting World War Two. Two different wars. So obviously, France should have gone down the approach that de Gaulle was promoting up, the Basil Littleheart and Fuller, JFC Fuller theories out of Britain. Those are the ones, that Guderian adopted. They should have adopted those viewpoints, and so they would have then had a very good army to fight World War II. But they didn't. So, but even within that theory, and Bevan Alexander talks significantly about the French tanks, and part of it they talk about, but he's a strategic historian of the of military history and history of the strategic level. There's very few that write of that. Most of them write on a tactical level. So he does, I think, mention, I'm trying to remember, the one-man turret element of the French tanks and that being bad, but that's a tactical thing. But he talks about how terrible the French tanks were. And he also talks about that how good they were, and they were heavily armored, so that those elements, that was good. But how terrible they were in that they moved at the rate basically of a walking man. Now there were some cavalry type tanks, the Salma being one of them, but those were few and far between that had a faster speed. You might think movement rate is a tactical thing. Yes, but when you're moving by some method other than railroad, you're basically having to drive. So even not just in the battle, but if you're moving from here to here and you're moving at the speed of a walking man, in essence, instead of 40-50 miles an hour, or 40 miles an hour down a road, you're moving 10 miles an hour or something like that down the road. That does matter. So he was looking at that, and also the very small fuel tanks, because they were looking at about 4 hours or something of operational levels at these very slow speeds. So they had to constantly refuel, or the fuel was in a bad location, meaning the coordination of the fuel train and the tanks themselves was extremely inadequate. So where the Germans, and he goes into how the whole fuel systems affected the campaign between Germany and France, and that led to a few events in TRE from my earlier reading of his work. But so these tanks that they designed to fight World War I were just lousy for that. And so they should have been designed much more like the Germans. Now they could have still had the French character in that they were cast armor and that they were heavier armored and they weren't maybe as fast or maneuverable, but they could have had larger fuel tanks and easily little bigger engines to move them, double their speed or something, with still being basically French tanks. And so in planning for World War II, and I'm getting to my point here shortly, they could have made better tanks, but they still had an immense amount of tanks, mainly the Renault FT-17s, which was still, I do believe, the largest number of tanks the French had. Those are World War I tanks. They were either armed with an 8mm machine gun or a very low powered in the muzzle energy and also small charge 37mm gun. Not suitable for knocking out other tanks, maybe an FT-17, but not really suitable for knocking out much of anything. It's more suitable for, oh, there's a machine gun in a sandbag bunker, let's shoot at it kind of thing. That's what it was suitable for. Not really suitable for knocking out, not at all suitable for knocking out Maginot Line or a West Wall line type fortifications. It was low-powered 37mm gun. They had a lot of tremendous number of those left over from World War I or made in the immediate post-aftermath of World War I that France had. I'm a big advocate of keeping and maintaining using weaponry that you have instead of just sending them to the scrapyard and recycling them. Those tanks, I do believe the French used correctly in that even if you massed them together because of their really slow performances, because they were World War I tanks, two-man tanks, literally. I haven't been in one, but I remember when I was quite younger, there was one here in California that I was able to touch and look at and put my head inside. Very small, dinky little tanks. If you tried to mass them together, I don't think they would work in a Panzer Division type unit. But what they can work as is a support element to infantry attacks, because that's what they were designed to do. They were designed to, while the infantry were leapfrogging from shell hole to shell hole, or crawling on their bellies to the next position, or however you were intelligently advancing against the enemy opposition, not just marching in, rank file towards them, but like they did early World War I, but, moving intelligently to the attack, having some of those back there shooting their light artillery or their light gun or their machine guns as suppressive fire as your troops move up, it'll work. They'll do good. And so they would be useful for that. And if you have them, you should use them, and you should use them in a way that would work. So having the penny packets of those spread around, shall we say, more mobile, not the Maginot Line fixed defense division type units, but your more mobile infantry units, that is a good thing. Now, should you continue to build those, or should you, as they did with the Renault and Hotchkiss R-35s, they were both, well, H-35 and the R-35, they were two companies competing that basically rebuilt built new versions of the FT-17. They did go to, I think it was 3-man tanks in both of those versions, but they were incredibly slow. They generally had basically the same, if not exactly the same, caliber. They improved it a bit, but I think it would take the same 37mm shell from the FT-17. Gun on them, though I think both models also had a coaxial machine gun on. So it was an improvement over the concept and design, and that's what it was designed to be. And that they were heavier, and that they were heavy enough to stop anti-tank rifle rounds, not necessarily anti-tank rounds as in the PaK 36, the 37mm gun. They weren't impervious, but they were an upgrade useful. No, they should not have, and note by the number, like the R-35, they are not sure if it's exactly 1935, but they are a mid sort of 1930s design and production line. They improved the things with the H-39, which had a higher velocity 37mm gun, getting to the German type performance out of it. But so that they in essence just modernized the old style tanks, which that is the mistake, and that had they been building a more mobile, designed, focused army, that would have been good. So it is good to have each infantry division to have a company of tanks. The problem is that you're never producing, maybe the US you could say was, but most nations are never producing enough to have both your Sherplunk tanks, those that you're putting in the main armored thrust that you're concentrating in for your main thrust, and a few tanks to spread out as support vehicles for your general infantry divisions. But if you got old vehicles, use them. And that's getting back to the like the Indian armor here, is that if you have out-of-date tanks and you use them as you would use an armored division, meaning overwhelming firepower, thrust, and speed of maneuver in the enemy as a if you will, kinetic force to impact the enemy, you need to have relatively good modern tanks comparative to the enemies to do that, or you're just going to go in, if you're going in with machine gun armed tanks and are heading into Panzer IVs, you're going to lose, not just lose the equipment, but you're also going to lose people. And of course, if you're the Soviet Union, you may not care about the lives of your troops, meaning they're just literally cannon fodder kind of things. You don't care, because otherwise you might just put them in the gulag system or something. So you don't have a humanitarian reason. But you do have, even if you're the Soviet Union, you do have the reason of trained manpower of tank drivers. You don't want to put them into combat after you've trained them up if they're just going to die. You want to use them intelligently. Like we use this manpower in this game. We see 10,000 people die. We're worried whether the unit is still there and effective, not the actual casualty count, because these aren't real people. But we do want good quality units, well led, so we don't want the units to die. But you can use the out-of-date tanks in a tactical situation that is sort of, like I say, in a support role, sort of from behind, if you will, to support infantry divisions. It's just your tactics. You don't lead with the tanks, and like I just earlier when I started this whole monologue, you don't try to engage enemy tanks. If you spot them through your binoculars, you try to run away fast, though you try to, of course, communicate and know where your division's anti-tank guns are, and you try to lure the enemy in. So it's not an offensive use of a tank, it's a defensive or support use of a tank, and you lure them into the trap. And hopefully, keep out of effective range, because they may be able to penetrate your armor, but if you're, bouncing through, now a lot of this desert was just very flat, but even still, bouncing around over minor little dunes, or you're going through hills, or you're in and out through forests, they're just getting glimpses of you at certain ranges. It's hard to actually hit you with their overwhelming gun power, so they'll chase you, so you run away, and hopefully that kind of thing. So your use of out-of-date armor is still effective in a support role, which some nations did well, some nations didn't do well. Let's see, what's that? We've got to move more to officers. What's happening is a lot of these event-driven OOBs radically reducing my amount of thing. And I'm guessing all of these, because to my understanding, the way the I don't know if by adding these units, I don't think we get the officers for them. If you know what I mean, it's more of a ratio thing. How many each one of those brigades needs in officers, though they can be killed in combat, so you need to replace them. But if you just have an event like this and give me a huge amount of units, That's why we're down at 87% officers. You give me a bunch of units. So if I disband those units, and there's maybe, but see, I don't need the manpower, but my officer ratio to the number of brigades would go up, and it varies, of course. This unit needs a lot more officers than per manpower than this unit, kind of thing. But that's what's eating into my officers, and I don't want it to get it too low. And I don't quite want to yet just destroy these to just get rid of that. But I still have hopes of, because if you note it, well, that's stacked with Vichy units. Let's move it up. What I'm hoping is that even though these are completely disorganized now, not stacked with Vichy. Let's send these all over next to here. That during the brief moment between, if Vichy comes into the Allies, depending on, now if they come in, if they actively join the Axis, if they're occupying a province that doesn't have any Vichy in it, and I can send supplies, these units can reorganize up to be able to fight. Or if German occupation happens to be occupation without Vichy becoming, an active war against us, we can again at least briefly occupy some of these provinces, and if I have ships, maybe I can run them in quick enough to withdraw them, or who knows, maybe they get organized up enough they could create a second French front here. But personally, I just love to move them out, but we'll see what we do about that. Road network. Okay, now let's look at radio programs. Where are we here with that? Okay. We have money is at least 1,000. That's why we're not getting some of the larger than the others. Our money isn't probably large enough for some of them, so we will take small heroic tales. Look at right. Yeah, small heroic tales. That will help us out. Okay, well, we're going to end the episode here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. Do appreciate that. And of course, please post comments, corrections, questions. Love hearing from you guys. See you next episode.